Chapter 24. The first navigational stop the wild card had made after leaving Dayark had showed nothing ahead. Nothing but the twisting glow of the Cathal Rift and the fiery frozen wisps of ionized gas streamers and miniature nebula that looked as if they'd been torn from it by violence. So had the second stop, and the third, until Shada had begun to wonder if the legendary lost world of Exocron was truly nothing but a myth. On the fifth stop, they found it. "It looks quite pleasant," 3PO commented, somewhat doubtfully from Shada's side as they gazed out the Wildcard's bridge viewport at the small planet rapidly approaching. "I do hope they will be friendly." "I wouldn't count on it," Shada warned him, feeling an unfamiliar and an unpleasant dryness in her mouth. Down there somewhere, if Jade and Calrissian were right, Jorj Karrde would be waiting for them. At the helm, O'Donnell half turned in his seat. "Shouldn't we have the turbo lasers ready?" he asked Karrde. "Just in case they're not happy at having their privacy infringed on." Shada looked at Karrde. He was hiding his nervousness well, but she herself had no trouble seeing it. "We're here to talk, not fight," he reminded O'Donnell, his voice steady. "I don't want anyone down there getting the wrong impression." "Yes, but after Dayark—" "We're here to talk," Karrde repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Hisashi, are we picking up any sensor probes or transmissions, Chin?" "No probes yet, chieftain," the Togorian said. Her fur, Shada noted, had fluffed out just noticeably. Apparently, she'd picked up on Karrde's mood too. "Nothing of transmissions either, Captain," Chin ranted. "Perhaps they not see us come in." "Oh, they see us all right," Karrde said, a hint of grimness creeping into his tone. "The only question—" He broke off at a beep from the comm. "Incoming starship. This is Admiral Trey David, second in command to Supreme Admiral Horzo, Dar of the Exocron Combined Airspace Fleet," a courteous but firm voice said. "Please identify yourselves." Chin reached for his board. "No, I'll do it," Karrde told him, visibly bracing himself as he touched his comm switch. "This is Talon Karrde aboard the freighter Wildcard, Admiral David. Our intentions are totally peaceful. We'd like permission to land." There was a long pause. A very long pause, in fact. Shada rubbed her knuckles gently, visualizing a heated argument going on in the Exocron Combined Fleet office. "Wildcard, this is Admiral David," the voice came back. "I'm told you're here to see Jorj Karrde. Can you confirm that?" Shada watched Karrde closely, but aside from a brief twitch at the corner of his mouth, there was no reaction. "Yes, I can," he said, his voice a little hollow but under control. "There's a vital matter I urgently need to discuss with him." "I see." There was another pause, shorter this time. "Is he expecting you?" Another twitch of the lip. "I don't know if expecting is the proper word. I do believe he knows I'm coming." "Do you?" David said, his voice suddenly sounding a little odd. "Very well, Wildcard. You're cleared for Circle 15 at the Renata City Military Landing Field. Coordinates are being sent to you now." "Thank you," Karrde said. "Got it," O'Donnell muttered, studying his nav display. "Looks pretty straightforward." "We have an escort on the way," David continued. "I trust I don't have to tell you to cooperate with them." "I understand completely," Karrde said. "Will I be seeing you there?" "I doubt it," David said, and this time there was definitely a darkness in his voice. "But perhaps we'll all be lucky. You never know." David out. For a moment the bridge was quiet. Shada looked around at the others, at their tight faces and tense shoulders and grim expressions. If they hadn't known before what they were getting into, she decided, they knew now. And yet, she saw no indication that any of them were even thinking of trying to back out. A truly loyal, close-knit crew, completely dedicated to their chief. Much as Shada herself had once been dedicated to the ideals of the Mistral, even when the Mistral themselves had all but forgotten those ideals. Even in the face of the looming danger ahead, the memory of that loss still hurt. Instructions, Captain? O'Donnell asked quietly. Karrde didn't hesitate. Take us down, he said. Rentata City was a middling-sized cluster of military-style buildings interspersed with about 50 landing pads of varying sizes, many with ships already settled down onto them. The military areas were in turn surrounded by a wide ring of civilian-style homes and businesses and community buildings. The whole thing was nestled up against the base of a short but rough-sided ridge of mountains, the city giving way to a grassy plain on its other sides. There was no shakedown like there had been at Pembroke II, nor was there any sort of customs or entrance inquiry at all as the wild card headed into the surface. The two aging system patrol ships that Admiral David had sent escorted the freighter to its assigned landing circle, watched as it set down, then headed off again into the sky without comment. Around the other ships, hundreds of men and women and dozens of small vehicles were hurrying about various tasks of their own, completely ignoring the off-world ship that had set down in their midst. From all appearances, Karrde thought as he and the others started down the ramp, all of Exocron might be trying to pretend the visitors didn't exist. With one notable exception. Good day, Captain Karrde, Antony beamed from the foot of the wildcar's landing ramp. Welcome to Exocron. I see that even without my help you were able to find us. Hello, Shada. Hello, 3PO. Hello, Antony, 3PO replied, sounding distinctly relieved to see a familiar face. I confess I had not expected to find you here. There was some question about you as well, Antony said cheerfully. When I last saw you on Dayark, you seemed to be having pirate trouble. He took a step closer to the ramp and peered up into the ship. Will your charming Togorian be joining us? No, Hisashi will be staying with the ship, Karrde told him, eyeing the little man with some bemusement. Hisashi was an increasingly valued member of his crew, but charming was not a descriptive term that would have automatically sprung to mind. Too bad, Antony said, looking at Shada and 3PO again. Is this it, then? You don't want to bring any others along? Karrde felt his muscles tense up again, despite all his efforts to relax them. Certainly he wanted to bring more people along. The Wild Card's entire crew, for starters, plus the crews of the Starry Ice and the Etherway, General Bella Bliss's complete New Republic task force, Rogue Squadron, and about 4 clans worth of Nagri warriors. But even if he had had such resources, it would be a futile gesture. Karrde was waiting for him, and bringing more people would only mean putting more people at risk. That wasn't why he was here. Yes, he told Antony. This is it. Do I assume you're here to take us to Jorj Karrde? If you wish to see him, the little man said, his eyes thoughtful on Karrde's face again. Once again, as on Dayark, glimpses of the true Antony were peeking through the carefully crafted facade of harmlessness. Well, shall we go? He led the way to an open-topped land speeder at the edge of the landing circle. A land speeder, Karrde noted, that despite Antony's apparent surprise at the small size of the party, was only a 4-seater. Waving his way expertly in and out of the rest of the traffic, the little man headed off towards the mountains. What's going on here? Shada asked, gesturing around them as Antony dodged around a particularly slow-moving fuel truck. They're preparing for some sort of maneuvers, I expect, the other said. Military people are always maneuvering one direction or another. How far is it to where we're meeting Karrde? Karrde asked, not particularly interested in what the Exocron Combined Airspace Fleet had on its agenda for the day. Not far, Antony assured him. Do you see that light blue building straight ahead, the one just a bit up the slope of the mountain? That's where he is. Karrde shaded his eyes from the sunlight. From this distance, at least, it was not a very impressive place. Not a fortress, not even a mansion. In fact, as Antony cleared the military area and started across the more sparsely trafficked civilian section of the city, the light blue building ahead began to look more and more like a simple, unassuming house. Shada was apparently thinking along the same lines. Is that where Karrde lives, or just where we're meeting him? She asked. Antony threw her a quick smile. It's always questions with you, isn't it? Such a good, thoughtful mind. Asking questions is part of my job, Shada countered, and you haven't answered me. Answering questions isn't part of my job, Antony said. Come now, there's no need for impatience. It's only a little farther. Just relax and enjoy the trip. The blue house continued to look smaller and less impressive the closer they got. Smaller, less impressive, older, and considerably shabbier. As you can see, it was built right up against the cliff face, Antony commented as they drove past the last cluster of other houses and started across a grassy field with a rapid creek running through the middle of it. I believe the original owner thought that would provide extra stability during the winter winds. What happened to the left side? Shada asked, pointing. Did a wing get torn down? No, it was never built, Antony told her. Karrde once began to add on to the house, but, well, you'll see. An unpleasant tingle ran down Karrde's back. What do you mean, we'll see? What stopped him? Antony didn't answer. Karrde glanced over at Shada, found her looking at him with an odd expression on her face. A minute later they were there. Antony brought the land speeder to a smooth halt in front of a once white door whose paint had chipped and faded with age and neglect. You lead the way, Shada said to Antony, sliding herself deftly between Karrde and the house. I'll be behind you, Karrde will be behind me. Oh no, that won't do at all, Antony said. He shook his head, a quick, nervous-looking movement. Only Captain Karrde and I will be able to go in. Shada's eyes narrowed. Let me put it another way. No, that's all right, Shada, Karrde said, moving around her and taking a step towards the door. Away from the center of the group, with nothing between him and the blank and empty windows, he felt painfully exposed. If Karrde only wants to see me, then that's the way it has to be. Forget it, Shada said flatly, catching hold of Karrde's arm and hauling him bodily to a stop. Antony, either I go in with him, or he doesn't go in at all. Shada, this isn't helping, Karrde growled, glaring at her. Did she want all of them to be summarily shot down before he even had a chance to plead the New Republic's case? If he wanted me dead, he could have done it any of 100 points along the way. He could certainly do it right here. I know that, Shada shot back, and it doesn't matter. I came along as your bodyguard, and that's what I'm going to do. Karrde stared at her, a sudden strange sensation running through him. Back at that Orawood Tower meeting with Solo, Organa Solo, and Calrissian, Shada had merely agreed to come along on this trip to help out. When during the 2.5 weeks since then had the grudging agreement transmuted into the far deeper commitment of bodyguard? Shada, I appreciate your concern, he said, quietly but firmly, reaching up to where she still gripped his arm and putting his hand gently on top of hers. But you need to remember the big picture. My life, and what happens to it, isn't the most important thing at stake here. I'm your bodyguard, Shada said, just as quietly and just as firmly. It's the most important thing to me. Please, Antony spoke up. Please, I think you misunderstand. Captain Karrde and I must go in first, but you may certainly come in right behind us. It's simply that, well, you'll see. Shada still didn't look happy, but she gave a reluctant nod. All right, fine, she said. Just remember that if anything happens, you personally will be directly in my line of fire. You two first, then me, then 3PO. Really, Mistress Shada, I'm sure it's not necessary for me to come in with you, the droid hastened to assure her, taking a shuffling step back towards the land speeder. Perhaps I should remain here and guard the land speeder. Actually, he may be useful, Antony said, smiling reassuringly. Come, 3PO. It'll be all right. Yes, Master Antony, 3PO said in a resigned tone. Moaning almost inaudibly to himself, he shuffled to a spot half a meter behind Shada. But I must say, I have a bad feeling. Good, Antony said cheerfully. The solemn moment passed, he was radiating his usual harmlessness again. Shall we go? The door was unlocked. Karrde followed the little man in, feeling more vulnerable than ever as they stepped out of the sunlight into a dank, gloomy room. A room that, to his surprise, had apparently not been used for some time. The few pieces of furniture scattered about were old and dusty, with the same signs of long neglect that they'd seen in the exterior of the house itself. The three windows, which from the outside had seemed so dark and threatening, could now be seen from this side to be merely incredibly dirty, with the slight frosting effect that came from years of wind-driven dust or sand slashing across them. In the shafts of dim sunlight that managed to penetrate the grime, long strands of cobweb could be seen stretching from some of the big chairs to the ceiling. "This way," Antony said quietly, his voice an intrusion in the eerie atmosphere as he led them across the room to a closed door. "He is here, Captain Karrde. Please prepare yourself." Karrde took a deep breath. Behind him, he heard the faint scraping sound as Shada's blaster came free of its holster. "I'm ready," he said. "Let's get it over with." "Indeed." Reaching past him, Antony touched the door control. With a faint squeak, it slid open. It was the smell that hit Karrde first. An odor of age and distant memories and lost hopes. An odor of sickness and tiredness. An odor of death. The room itself was small, much smaller than Karrde would have expected. To both sides, built-in shelves covered each of the side walls, on which were stacked a strange assortment of small art objects, useless-looking knickknacks, and medical vials and equipment. A large bed took up most of the rest of the space, the foot coming to within a meter of the doorway and leaving barely enough room left over for two people to stand. And lying in the bed, beneath a stack of blankets, humming softly to himself as he stared at the ceiling, was an old man. "Jorj?" Antony called softly as he stepped through the doorway. The humming stopped, but the man's gaze remained on the ceiling. "Jorj, there's someone here to see you." Karrde stepped in beside him, squeezing into the remaining space, his mind spinning. No, surely this couldn't be Jorj Karrde. Not the vigorous, hot-tempered, ambitious man who'd almost single-handedly created one of the greatest smuggling organizations ever known. "Jorj?" he called carefully. The wrinkled face frowned and the head lifted up. "Merton?" a quavering voice asked. "Merton, is that you?" Karrde let a breath out in a tired sigh. The voice and the eyes. Yes, it was indeed him. "No, Jorj," he said gently. "Not Merton. It's Karrde. Talon Karrde. You remember?" The old man's eyes blinked a couple of times. "Karrde," he said in the same uncertain voice. "Is that you?" "Yes, Jorj, it's me," Karrde assured him. "Do you remember me?" A tentative smile started on the old man's face, fading as if the muscles were too old or too tired to hold on to it. "Yes," he said. "No. Who are you again?" "Talon Karrde," Karrde repeated, the bitter taste of defeat and disappointment and utter fatigue in his mouth. All this way. They'd come all this way to see Karrde and plead for his help. All of Karrde's fears about this meeting. His fears, his regrets, his guilt. All of it for nothing. The Jorj Karrde he had lived in quiet terror of for so many years was long gone. In his place was an empty shell. Dimly, through the darkness swirling through his mind, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Karrde," Shada said quietly. "There's nothing here anymore." "It was Karrde, right?" the old man asked. A thin arm came up from beneath the blankets, flailing a bit before the hand was able to tuck the pillows tighter behind his neck. "Talon Karrde?" Terran Karrde, he said. "It's Talon Karrde, Jorj," Antony corrected, his voice that of a patient parent to a very young child. "Is there anything I can get for you?" Karrde frowned, his head settling back onto the pillow, his eyes again drifting to whatever it was he saw on the sheathing. "Shemibble or star and some nittis Merton Adel?" he muttered, his voice almost inaudible. "Carmita David Shumitis Cree?" "Old Tarmitian," Antony murmured. "The language of his childhood. He's been slipping into that more and more lately." 3PO? Shada prompted. He's asking if Merton has been by here today, the droid translated. For once, there was no mention of how many types of communication he was fluent in. Or that nice Admiral David person. No, neither of them, Anthony said to the figure in the bed, motioning Karrde to back out of the room. I'll be back later, Jorj. Try to get some sleep, all right? He followed Karrde out of the room and reached for the door control. Sleep, the old man snorted weakly, giving a cackling laugh. Can't sleep now, Merton. Too much to do. Far too much to... The door slid shut, mercifully cutting off the rest. You see now how it is, Anthony said quietly. Karrde nodded, the taste of ashes in his mouth. All those years. How long has he been this way? And why did you even bother bringing us here in the first place? Shada demanded. What can I say? Anthony said. He's old, very old, with the many and varied afflictions that so often come of long age. His bright eyes shifted to Shada. And as for bringing you here, you were the ones who wanted to come. We wanted to see Jorj Karrde, Shada bit out. What's in there is not what we had in mind. It's all right, Shada, Karrde said. All those years. It's my fault, not Anthony's. I should have come here years ago. He blinked sudden tears from his eyes. I suppose there's only one more question to be asked. Anthony, Karrde once had a huge data card library. Do you have any idea where it might be? Anthony shrugged. Whatever he did with it, he did it long before I came to be in his service. Karrde nodded. So much for even their last hope of finding a copy of the Kamas document here. Wasted fears, and now a wasted trip. Suddenly he was feeling very old. Thank you, he said, pulling out his comlink and keying it on. Dankin? Right here, Chief, Dankin's voice came promptly, an edge of tautness to it. How are things? Running quite smoothly, thank you, Karrde said, giving the all-clear code response. The mission is over. Get the ship ready. We'll be leaving as soon as we get back. Yeah, well, that might be a bit tricky, Dankin said, his voice turning grim. There's something about to happen here, Chief. Something big. Every ship on the field's getting tooled up for combat. Karrde frowned. Are you sure? I'm positive, Dankin said. There are racks of missiles being taken aboard, gunner-type flak-vac suits, the works, and they seem to be arming a lot of civilian ships, too. It's Rakas and his pirates, Anthony murmured quietly at Karrde's side. It would appear one of them followed you in. Karrde grimaced, yet another piece of his carefully built-up mental picture crumbling to dust. He'd been so sure that Rakas had been hired and brought here by Karrde. No one should have been able to follow us, he told Anthony. We always watch our back trail very closely. Anthony shrugged again. I don't know how they did it. I only know that they did. According to Admiral David, their entire fleet has now left its hidden base and is on its way to Exocron. You knew about this before we even landed? Shada demanded. Why didn't you say something? What should I have said? Anthony countered. The damage had already been done. They had found Exocron. He gestured upward. In fact, that was why I wanted to bring you here myself from Dea, Captain Karrde. They wouldn't have been able to track my ship. Karrde grimaced, as if his guilt burden hadn't been heavy enough. Now this. How long before they reach the planet? Excuse me, 3PO spoke up before Anthony could answer. But if pirates are on their way, shouldn't we be planning our departure? He's right, Anthony agreed. Still, there's no particular hurry for you. They won't be here for at least another 8 hours, possibly more. What about you? Shada asked. Anthony's mouth puckered. I'm sure we'll be all right. I'm told the combined air-space fleet is quite good. Maybe against the occasional smuggler or rock dodger, Shada said darkly. But this is Rakas we're talking about. It's our trouble, not yours, Anthony said firmly. You'd best make preparations to go. The comlink Karrde suddenly realized was still on. "Dankin," he called. "You get all that?" "We got it, Chief," Dankin confirmed. "You still want me to get the ship ready?" Karrde looked past Antony at the room's darkened windows. Beyond those windows were people his actions, however unintended, had put in deadly danger. Which meant that there really wasn't any decision here to be made. "Yes, get it ready," he told Dankin. "But get it ready for full combat." He looked back at Antony. "We're going to stay and fight." That's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.